Welcome to On Point. I'm your host, Roger McConnell, and I'll be here every other Tuesday at 1 p.m. with topical shows addressing the needs and concerns of military veterans and active duty personnel. Attention Vietnam vets. Can you remember back to those in-country flights, maybe to and from R&R centers or to and from your base camps? Those amazing airplanes, often a de Havilland UA Otter, could seemingly land on a dime. I'm in Irvine, California for my 50th high school reunion. I'm sitting here with a friend, high school semi-pal from that many years ago, and we're talking about how what his experiences were flying this particular aircraft, this de Havilland UA Otter that I described earlier. And Jack, tell us when you did this, first of all. What year, or tell us how you got into flying that plane.
Well, Roger, it's a pleasure to be here. I took an interest in aviation because my father was a pilot, a Navy pilot in World War II, and he was killed in June of 1945.
In combat?
In combat. He flew a four-engine bomber. It was a Navy bomber, and they flew in flights of two. Both planes were shot down in the South China Sea, about, 50 miles off the coast of Shanghai. All the crew members, 10 members on my father's plane, died. And the other plane, who was actually the squadron commander, was also shot down, but 8 of those guys lived and were taken prisoner of war. And they were able to tell the story afterwards. But at any rate, as a child, I wanted to be a military pilot because obviously my father was one.
I mean, friendly fire, what was the football player's name? Pat Tillman.
Tillman, yeah.
They say after many different stories that weren't true circulated, that he was killed by friendly fire.
Yeah, I know that. I heard that.
Friendly fire has always been a fact of life.
We lose as many from friendly as we do from the enemy.
It's hard to believe, but
and there's no excuse for it as far as I'm concerned.
Well, in the heat of battle, it's...
I know, but oftentimes it's stupidity and screw-ups.
It is stupidity, and it's fear, and it's everything that goes into making a human being.
Right.
And we are very fallible creatures, and that stuff happened routinely. When I first got there with the 9th Infantry Division, we had an artillery battery that fired into a commo wire right in front of the gun or a pole or something, and it killed all the guys on the gun. And that shouldn't have happened. However, should-haves, could-haves don't always equal are.
Right.
And a lot of people died needlessly, but it's just the way it worked.
I do think the military has gotten much better at those sort of things than when we were in.
But now the people are so up in arms about it that people just didn't find out about it before. I had a guy in our, when we were walking out on the ground, I was armored cavalry, but we became mech infantry. This guy had been walking in front of the guy with a grenade launcher. Those grenade launchers would fire about 400 meters, but they didn't arm. That grenade didn't arm until it revolved X number of revolutions after it left that barrel. So it wouldn't arm itself for, I don't know, I'm going to guess 50 feet or something like that. Well, this guy was limping really badly one day when we were on this sweep, and he told the story that when he had gone on a sweep the day before with a different group of guys, that the guy holding the grenade launcher accidentally triggered this M79 round, and it hit him right in the back, high on the thigh, right under his butt, and it just almost knocked a hole through him, but thankfully it didn't go off because it hadn't traveled far enough to arm itself.
Yeah.
But he could barely walk.
Yeah.
But friendly fire deaths were just a reality.
Well, you're right. It used to be, and I know in World War II they just didn't find out about it.
Right.
Well, they
or
find
it wasn't publicized.
You know, in today's world, they find out about everything because the media's right there, or somebody's got a cell phone taking a picture of it and sending it God knows where. And it's a shame because you hate, you know, if you were a family member, you just hate to learn that this is how your kid died, you know.
Well, I guess maybe having been there, if I were a parent of a son, a daughter who was in harm's way and who got killed by friendly fire, I wouldn't want to hear that news. But I would fully understand, having seen all the mishaps that occurred on the ground in combat. It's just a miracle that there weren't more friendly fire deaths.
Yeah.
But here we are, and thankfully it has gotten somewhat better, although they're still not as forthright in discussing the actual facts of what occurs out there, and still trying to con us, which is aggravating. But I guess they've got their own motivators.
Yeah.
Now, how, in maybe any other respects that we haven't already discussed, did the Vietnam experience change you?
Well, as I was telling you earlier, I have sort of a positive outlook over the whole experience. Number one, I loved flying. And it's not the best way to learn to fly, but I did a lot of it in that 1 year I was there. And so that part I enjoyed. There was other aspects that, you can probably sense from my earlier comments. I think I told you earlier, the game that was played in my company was every three weeks we got a new company commander. And it just killed continuity of operations.
No stability.
Yeah, every officer, every commissioned officer wanted to have on their resume command of a company in Vietnam. And so they just ran them through. It was like a command mill. Now, for somebody who's there 6, 7 months, 8 months, you see this, and you see the dumb decisions that the newest guy who only is going to be there a few weeks makes, and you start to get a bad attitude.
It could be dangerous to you.
Yeah. And when you get to about month 11, you become paranoid about making it to month 12 and getting the hell out.
Right.
And you say things you shouldn't say. And I said a few. I actually got a written letter of reprimand for my big mouth at one point. And God bless this one major whose name I don't even remember anymore, but he got me out of there on an R&R for a week, or I probably would have been court-martialed.
The guy had it in for you. Who wrote the letter? A colonel, did you say?
I think it was a major. Oh, no, it was a colonel that wrote the letter. Well, his name was on the letter. I'm sure he had somebody help him with it.
Right. But you survived it. Now, how else? What else? You got a bad attitude toward the end of the war.
Yeah.
But what have you held through all the years?
Well, it really, I think, if you wanted a training program in how to confront fear, spending a year in Vietnam would be a great way to do it, And we've kind of talked here about this before. The definition of courage is being able to control your emotions when you're terrified. And you can learn it. You can learn to slow your heart rate and focus and think about what you need to do and get through it. And we all did. But there were times when, we were near meltdown while it was happening.
And
but
those practice sessions
yeah.
took a toll on you, didn't they?
But then in my civilian life, I wasn't afraid to do a lot of things in business that others were afraid to do. And public speaking is a perfect example of that, where, to me, standing up in front of a crowd and saying what needed to be said was a walk in the park compared to a year in Vietnam. There was nothing to be feared here. There was going to be no bullets flying, nothing. There was going to be nasty words, but weren't going to hurt you, So there was some skills that I think I learned from the military, and I really cherish my I would go back in the military in a heartbeat, even if there wasn't a war, because I think it prepares young people for their life in the future. And you see many of the leaders in our country today have military backgrounds. And shamefully, some of our leaders today don't have it, and they should have had it, probably,
I agree.
Yeah. The military does a great service to this nation, not just in fighting wars, but in training leaders and in disciplining young people on how to live life in a disciplined way. So I encourage young people now to join the military, And their parents typically fight it like mad. They don't want their kids to do it, and they probably ought to want them to do it because it puts them in great shape for their future lives.
I never was a father. I think that one of the reasons they don't want their kids involved in the military is that often getting in the military results in some serious injuries, if not death, and not too many parents want to get involved with that. I want to bear their
You can
kids.
step off a curb in downtown Chicago and have somebody kill you.
Well, I hear you.
And look at the stats. They die more on U.S. highways than in the wars we fight, maybe with the exception of the Civil War.
Right. It's I remember our unit had a couple of events occur in Vietnam, and CBS Evening News rolled newsreels, which remember our war was the first television war. And here they're showing newsreels of my unit, and they announced the name of the unit, the elements of the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment were in contact today. And they'd show film clips of these vehicles burning and talk about the number of casualties and talk about how we rallied and valiantly fought off the army of in Vietnam, the North Vietnamese or whatever. And it would be 4 days before we could get a letter home. There were no cell phones. There was a radio thing that you could get sometimes, but you couldn't always speak directly through ham operators to get a message through the phone line to your folks. I did that once, but that was not routine. That was like a perk that occurred one time.
Yeah.
But they're sweating bullets for 4 days, not knowing if you're alive or dead, because they watched the film, and human beings, being what they are, naturally their fears, their wildest fears, just went crazy in their heads, and it would be awful. Now, cell phones, they could be talking 5 minutes after something like that might have hit the news, and just saying, "Hey, Mom, I'm okay."
Yeah. We were talking earlier. I think, many of us came home to a negative experience. I'm a Californian, as you are, and California was a hostile environment for Vietnam
returnees. A lot
returnees.
of protesters, but thank God they protested. Otherwise, we might still be in
Well, that's true,
Vietnam.
but it was still a hostile environment.
I know.
And it was a culture shock. One day you're in combat, and the next day, it's like business as usual. Nobody cares except the people protesting.
Right.
But in general, I think it's safe to say we all know Vietnam vets were not treated well when they came home, and what a difference today that the vets are really treated well. And as you said, I think we can thank ourselves for that, because
that's part of our legacy.
There was some guilt. I'm sure there was a lot of guilt on the part of a lot of people over how we were treated, and it's all changed. I mean, we really make an affirmative effort to reach out and treat them well when they come home now.
I know our vet groups in Great Falls, we do all we can do to make things easier on these kids coming home. We try to father them, just listen to them, just be part of their experience, and just let them know that if we got through it psychologically without killing ourselves or whatever some of the other side effects are, then they can do the same thing. They can get through it too. And
I think the VA is making a much better effort at dealing with it too. I told you earlier I was exposed to Agent Orange, and I'm now on this Agent Orange watch list. But they do watch me, and they will send me a letter and say, we need you to come in and we want to look at you. So they are affirmatively going after these people. They're not just letting them sit there and say, I don't want to go to this doctor's appointment. And I remember the first time it happened, I just sort of blew it off, and then I canceled. And the next thing I know, I got another letter. All right, well then let's reschedule. And that pleases me when I think about it, because it tells me that the administration of the Veterans Administration is serious about making sure these people get the treatments that they need.
They're training a lot harder now. Like you say,
Yeah.
they're hunting for you instead of hiding from you.
Yeah.
And that's the way it seemed a lot of times when you had problems that you wanted to take to people with help.
In where I live in Modesto, there is no VA facility, so these poor guys would have to get on a bus at 7 o'clock in the morning and go to the Bay Area 100 miles away, and then come back late at night on the bus. It was just a miserable experience. They're now building a facility right in our town so that guys don't have to go a couple
Like
hundred miles.
A clinic.
Yeah, it's a clinic.
CBOC.
Yeah.
Community out-based.
Right, and it's a first-class facility, and it's not done yet, but I drive by there and I think, wow, I'm not used to this, you know.
And they take good care of us, much better. They had the rep for a long time of having substandard doctors and nurses and orderlies, but
right.
They're very dedicated folks, and our particular VA hospital in Montana, we only have one in the whole state, but it has excellent references. I think it's considered one of the best in the country. Now, would you share with the folks listening about how you got exposed to Agent Orange?
Well, the Air Force would spray this stuff at altitude from C-123 cargo planes. They just open up the back, and I don't know how they were dumping it out of there, but
rolling the barrel to the back, probably threw the whole barrel out.
They probably just poured it out and it aerated as it went out, you know. But it was a wide swath, and we were flying underneath at lower altitudes. We weren't very high most of the time, 1,000 feet maybe 2,000.
And it just filtered down like rain out of the sky.
Yeah, it was like rain. And then,
oh, man.
after it had been on the ground for a few days and you flew over it, you could see where the airplane flew. It was just a wide swath of dead foliage.
Crazy.
It killed everything in sight. Okay.
What color? Could you see a color?
Yeah, brown.
It was brown, okay.
Yeah, it would turn green to brown for miles. Well,
No,
as far
I
as
mean,
you could see.
What color was the Agent Orange?
It was clear. There was no color to it.
Oh,
It wasn't
wasn't
orange,
just-
that was for sure.
Okay.
Maybe it was in the barrel, but it wasn't
Not
orange.
on your skin.
No.
You didn't. But
And
you
we
actually-
always flew with the windows open, okay?
Right.
So my neighbor actually was a Vietnam vet, and I was telling him how I was exposed to this stuff. Well, he gave me a big ass chewing and said, you need to get on the Agent Orange watch list. And I'd been thinking about it for a long time, but, you know, I'm still invincible, even though I'm 67 years old. But he worked on me, and I went down to the office and signed up, and I was just shocked at how well I was treated, you know. And then they came after me at that point, you know. Big interview, all the details. They wanted to confirm that I actually was exposed to it. And I said, well, I have my flight logs for every day I was there and exactly where I went the whole time. Okay, and you can just lay it out on the map of Vietnam and overlay where they sprayed, and I can guarantee I was there most of the time, okay?
Underneath the planes dropping.
And we were going in and out of these Special Forces camps and base camps, and so we'd take off. We wouldn't climb to very high altitude, and then we'd land again. So they were at maybe, I don't know, 3,000-4,000 feet, and we're at maybe 1 or 2. So we were always underneath them. And no one, and this is something I'm angry about still, no one told us this stuff is dangerous, stay away from it. Because we'd have had enough brains to get out from underneath it if we'd have known it was a problem, you know. Now I pity the guys in those planes that were opening those canisters and dumping it out, and ground crews that were exposed to it. I mean, that stuff was all, even in the Navy they had it.
Well, the troops on the ground, too, a lot of them had it dumped on
Yeah,
them.
exactly. Because if the wind was blowing, they weren't sure where it was going.
Well, there was even one guy in our group who was in the Brownwater Navy, and they were on a repair barge in one of those huge rivers around Saigon. And they would get these shot-up patrol river boats and go underwater, weld on them, patch them up. He was swimming in Agent Orange, and he got a bad case of cancer, got his leg taken off, and has just tumors all over him. It's
Yeah.
He's still alive, but it's
Somebody told me that they They were actually flying it off of aircraft carriers too.
I heard
so
that
there's
too.
Navy guys that were playing with that stuff.
That's right, and they can't push their claims through. People are not listening to them, that they were exposed to it on board aircraft carriers. They loaded it on planes that took off from the carriers to dump it, is
Right.
what
Well, this
I
was like
remember him
serious
saying.
Roundup, okay?
Yeah, max Roundup.
Max Roundup, yeah.
Now, you told me of another event that occurred when you were an official in Sacramento, where you worked and lived for many years, about the Vietnam, or was it a Vietnam veteran or Vietnam memorial?
Yeah,
or just,
Vietnam, California Veterans Memorial, Vietnam Veterans Memorial.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Well, it was in the, I think it was in the mid '80s. I can't remember exactly what year.
You worked on the committee then to?
No.
Okay.
I was the finance director for the city of Sacramento, and the commission was formed in Sacramento at the state capitol. It was headed by B.T. Collins, a famous Vietnam veteran. And he'd been a captain on the ground. I think he was in a mechanized unit, as you were. But at any rate, the man was driven. He was appointed to a couple top department head positions in the state of California at one point. And I think he even ran the California Veterans Department for a period of time. He's dead now. But he headed up this commission, and in order to build this thing the way they wanted it, which was several $1 million, they needed to fundraise. And so I was asked, they came to me as the finance director, and they asked me if the city would be willing to make a contribution to the memorial. So I said, well, let's find out. And I wrote a staff report and put it on the city council agenda. And I asked for $5,000 for this memorial. With very little discussion, one of the more conservative members of our city council made a motion for $15,000, and it was approved unanimously. And so we wrote him a check for $15,000. We were the first city in California to make a contribution to the memorial. After that, a lot of cities did make contributions. But it took them several years to raise, and I don't even remember how many millions, but it was at least 2, I think, and maybe more than that, to build this thing, because it was first class. And they put it in Capitol Park, right across from, at the other end of Capitol Park from the Capitol itself. And the day that was unveiled, there was probably 3,000 crying Vietnam vets in that park. I remember it well, and I'm still emotional about it. At any rate, a few weeks later, the commission came to a city council meeting to present the mayor and the council with a little miniature monument of the memorial itself. And it was very nicely done.
It's on a plaque?
It was a plaque, but it also had in front of that and attached to the plaque an infantry soldier with his M16 kneeling. And it thanked the City Council of Sacramento for that contribution. The next day after that council meeting, I was, for some reason, I don't remember what, in the mayor's office, and he had thrown it in the trash can. He was anti-war, obviously, and he hadn't said nothing in the public meeting, but I guess that was his way of showing, at least his staff, what he thought of the Vietnam War. Yeah, and so here was this thing that I cherished sitting in a trash can. So I rescued it because obviously he didn't want it. And this was the mayor of the city. And so it is now, I don't know, 30 years later, and it is sitting in my office at home. It's probably not the best place for it, but it's a hell of a lot better than the trash can it was in.
Or the dumpster it was going to get dumped into.
Exactly. And maybe someday the city will want it.
Well, that's just kind of emblematic about the way society's changed. There was disdain. Society wanted to sweep Vietnam under the rug and not face the national shame
Yeah.
that maybe we had incurred, rightfully so in some cases. But now things are different, and the returning soldiers are revered, they're honored, and I think we've done a good job of helping change that.
There's no question. There's support groups that actually go to the airports when they arrive.
I've done that.
That's wonderful.
It's a very warm feeling to see
Mm-hmm.
the looks in these kids' eyes when they get off the plane and here is a welcoming committee. I did it with a Native American contingent for a lady warrior.
Oh.
And she was an amazing person. Just
Well, you know, speaking of lady warriors, you and I talked earlier about nurses, and it's
Yes.
good to see them getting some recognition as well.
yes, because as we also mentioned before, what they saw was assembly line carnage with all these shattered bodies, and so many of them didn't survive Vietnam. And at that time, it wasn't a World War II type casualty rate where we lost hundreds of thousands of people, but we still had a lot of casualties and deaths from Vietnam, 58,000 and change, nearly 59,000. I don't remember how many casualties, but multiple
Oh, it's a couple hundred
amputations.
thousand.
No, at least.
Yeah.
It was usually a 5-to-1 ratio, or even sometimes 7-to-1
Yeah,
of wounded to
right.
KIA, killed in action. But those nurses saw just the absolute worst of what we've...
I really think the military got their act together after Vietnam in a way they never had then. And you saw that in Desert Storm, where they didn't waste any time winning that war.
Take it away for a minute here. What do you want to say on the way out?
Well, we've pretty much talked about it all. You know, going back to the beginning, it started with my father. I'll tell you a little story. He served 2 tours in the Pacific. He flew a 2-engine bomber the first part of the war, and the 4-engine at the end of the thing. And they had this top secret weapon that they had developed. It was a wire-guided missile. Now, 20 years later, we had them on helicopters in Vietnam, and they were fairly accurate. But in World War II, they developed this thing. It was top secret, and they put them on this 4-engine bomber that my father flew called the Privateer. It was a consolidated Privateer. And they trained in Kansas. And the theory was that they would stand off at 7,000 feet and 7 miles and shoot this weapon. And it was fairly accurate, which would keep the whole crew out of harm's way in theory. Well, when they went to Okinawa, the things didn't work worth a damn. They were totally inaccurate because no one had failed to consider the climate change from Kansas, United States, to the South China Sea. So they went over in May, and after about 1 week, the squadron commander decided that these things wouldn't work, and so they were going to attack the enemy shipping and guns with just flying low level right into the eye of the enemy. And I went to a reunion of my father's squadron here a few years ago, and 5 of the guys of the 8 that lived on that second plane were there and told me all about it. It was really an emotional experience. But because the...
Did they see your father's plane?
Oh yeah.
Go down?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They saw it. The Japanese shipping, they would have these cargo freighters, but they would disguise what they called a picket boat, which was just a platform with guns on it. And when you came in low level, point blank, they would unveil these guns, and you were just a sitting duck. Anyway, my father died on June 26, 1945, and less than 3 months later, the war was over. But, you know, I tell that story because we've become much more sophisticated today. I don't think we force our troops to go into harm's way with theories. When they go into harm's way, it's practice, and they know the weapons they have work. And I mentioned Desert Storm, but the artillery accuracy of those tanks was phenomenal. they didn't have to get in harm's way many times with the enemy, and the tanks were completely dominant in that war.
And the Bradleys and so much of our equipment
Yeah,
was superior to what Saddam had.
Right. Yeah.
In any event, Jack Crist, thank you very much.
Well,
Class
Roger,
of 62.
Thank you for doing it.
I'm glad to, Jack.
God bless you and keep it up.
Thank you, Jack.
You've been listening to my conversation with Jack Crist, former Vietnam bush pilot. On Point continues to air every other Tuesday at 1 p.m. on Montana Public Radio, KGPR, Great Falls. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future shows, please contact me, Roger McConnell, at 406-799-6709 or an email onpointkgpr@bresnan.net.